Good morning, Rabbi Sai. I want to give an extra special thanks to Moshe Abramson today because it just took four of us to do the work of one Moshe Abramson. But Baruch Hashem, between four of us, we figured out all the technical details of the Zoom and the recording and the microphone and the camera. So Baruch Hashem, we have Moshe filling in for Moshe. So Moshe ad Moshe and Moshe. So it's a Baruch Hashem. It's a testament to our technical skills and that we got this all together. I'm Rabbi Kalman Akiva Kovacs, filling in for Rabbi Silber, and I want to start with these sponsorships. This says, okay. We have a Talmud Torah sponsor of Czinn Teri Kahn Czinn, gratitude to Hashem, welcoming their first grandchild, Adin Tzvi Hochbaum, son of Anna and Yoni Hochbaum in New York City, Mazel Tov, and Benjamin and Elys Wohl with immense debt of gratitude to the Rebbe for inspiring and changing the way we approach Pesach, beautiful, still Pesach, Shimmy Batsheva Messing in honor of the Bas Mitzva of their daughter Lilah, Mazel Tov, and Paul and Kathy Pollack in memory of Paul's father Shmuel ben Zechariah Zal and mother Leah Bas Abramson and great-grandmother Tziril Bas Rav Dov Zal, who are all niftar in Nisan. We have a week of learning sponsor by Neil and Pam Weissman in loving memory of Pam's father Achazon Yisrael Zundel Zal ben Moishe Hudaleib Zal, and a Daf Yomi sponsor from Rebecca Chesner in memory of her father Rav Yitzchak ben Meir Zal in his first yahrzeit. May his neshama have an aliyah. So Rabbi Sai, we are starting on Yud Beis at the very top. I did want to say something about yesterday. Yesterday's daf was really amazing, and I spoke with Rebbe after this year because we had a mention of the bridge built for Para Aduma. Now, this bridge connected Har HaBayis, the Beis Midrash, and Har HaZeisim, where they would do the burning of the Para Aduma. And Rebbe was asking yesterday we had an amazing Gemara mentioned that every Kohen Gadol who did a Para Aduma would knock down the old bridge and build a brand new bridge. And the Havamim in the Gemara was, isn't that a display of sort of an arrogance? You're displaying your wealth. You could knock down this whole project, and it was huge. You've been there. You've been by Har HaBayis and Har HaZeisim. They're close, but not that close for both. It would be a massive arched bridge to connect these two hills. And it's an immense expense, and wouldn't that be showing off to knock down the old bridge and build a new one? And the Gemara answers no, because Shimon Tzaddik did two. He had two Para Adumot, and he knocked down his own bridge to build a new bridge. So rather, it's not a display of arrogance and wealth. It's to show the nation how important Para Aduma is, and to prevent any sort of tuma from taking place, so that the ritual will go off properly, and it can be properly matire people who are tamei meis. Now, Rebbe yesterday asked, well, how many Para Aduma were there? So I looked up, it's in the Rambam. So the Rambam in Hilchos Para, chapter 3, halacha 4. What's that? The entire Jewish history. So here's the Rambam. He says, V'teisha parot adumot. There were 9 Para Aduma. Nasu mishnitstavu b'mitzvazu. Since we were commanded in this mitzvah. It's from Matan Torah. Ad shecharav b'bayit b'shniya. Until the churban of the second bite. Rishona asa Moshe Rabbeinu. The first one was made by Moshe Rabbeinu. And that one lasted a very long time. Shniya asa Ezra. Until the second one, Ezra Sofer did. That's about 1,000 years later. When the Galut returned from Bavel and started to build Bayit Sheni, that's when they built the second Para to be able to build the Bayit Sheni. So the entire first Beit HaMikdash, the entire tabernacle era, 1,000 years, was just Moshe's. And after Ezra, Vesheva me'Ezra ad Churban HaBayit. And in the second temple era, there were 7 Parot Adumot made. And then the Rambam says this is amazing, Rabbotai. Va'asirit, and the 10th Para Aduma, Yaseh HaMelech HaMashiach Mahera Yigale Amen Ken Yiratzon. The Rambam in Mishnah Torah. This is a Sefer Halacha. Some people gave the Rambam, we don't anymore. Some people, 1,000 years ago, gave the Rambam a hard time for being a rationalist or being influenced by Greek philosophy and all these things. He says Mahera Yigale, the Mashiach, in a Sefer of Halacha. The Rambam is Mekayim, the Halacha of Tzipisi Yeshua. He's waiting the Messianic redemption. It's the Rambam in Halacha is talking about Messianic redemption. But here's the interesting thing. There are only 9 in history. And the one from Moshe Rabbeinu lasted 1,000 years. From Ezra lasted hundreds of years. But Shimon HaTzadik had 2. So I told the Rebbe after Shia, this is very big. Tzorchi and Godel, why he needed 2. Now later on, we know they needed more. It was more often. The last 7 were in Bayit Sheni, because this was an era of the Greeks and the Romans. And we saw there's a Gemara in Makot, at the end of the first parak. Remember this maybe from high school, that they say that a Sanhedrin who put a murderer to death every 7 years, and Yeshomrim every 70 years, was called a bloody Sanhedrin. Now, some say 7, some say 70, because it used to be every 70 years. If there was a murder, that was news, that was a big deal. And then later on in history, in the Roman era, became nebuch more often, more common. There was a murder, it became every 7 years. Eventually, they teach that the Sanhedrin left Lishkat Gazit, they left their seat of trying capital cases, so they wouldn't have to try all these murders, because in the Roman times, nebuch, people appreciate the Romans for their culture. The Romans were bloody murderers. That's the honest truth. They were murderers. And Nebuch, when they occupied Eretz Yisrael, during the occupation, there were a lot of murders, a lot of tumah, a lot of terrible things. So murder became more common, and we needed more para aduma. There was more tumah, more corpses, Nebuch, during those Roman times. But the Tzorachiyun is on Shimon Tzadik. He's a Tzadik, and he made 2 para aduma. So I looked into it, and I have an answer about Shimon HaTzadik. And got to pull it up because I have Shas. I don't have Shas on my fingertips. I don't have Shas on my mind. But Baruch Hashem, I do have Shas on the phone. So there's a Gemara in Yuma Samech Tes, and it's a very famous Gemara, and we're going to remind it now. And Baruch Hashem, we have plenty of time to do the daf, so we can take these little side trips. So the Gemara asks, Medina lo, we can't wear Bigdei Kahuna outside of the Beis Midrash. V'atanya, there's a brisa, B'esrim Chamisha B'Tevet, Yom Har Grizim hu, Delo Limisped. There's a minor holiday on the 25th of Tevet because of Har Grizim, and they explain what happened. Yom Shebikshu Kutiyim, that's the day the Kutiyim tried to request to destroy at Beit Elokeinu, Alexandrus Mokton. They went to Alexander the Great, who was approaching Eretz Yisrael after conquering Egypt, and they asked him, Laha Charivo, to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. V'natnu lahem. And Alexander agreed with the Kutiyim to go and destroy the Beis Hamikdash. Ba'u hadiu as Shimon HaTzadik. They came and informed Shimon HaTzadik, the Kohen Gadol, Ma'asa, what did he do? Lavash Bigdei Kahuna, nit aftef Bigdei Kahuna. So he put on mamish all of the Bigdei Kahuna of the Kohen Gadol. U'miakira Yisrael imo, he took the leaders of the Jewish people, v'avukot shel or bidehen, and avukot, torches in their hands. Remember, at the end of Pesach, we talked about avuka versus ner. Avuka has more than one wick. It's a little chazar for you there. They took that in their hands. V'kol Lilah halalu halachim. They started walking all night towards Alexander the Great. Halachim mitzad zeh halalu halachim mitzad zeh. And the Kutim were coming also to Alexander the Great. Until the dawn started to rise. Kevan she'ala amud shachar. Once was the break of dawn and they could see, Amar lahem mi halalu. So Alexander says, who are these people coming? Amar la Yehudim shemardu b'cha. The Kutim told Alexander, these are the Jews rebelling against you. They're coming to kill you. Kevan she'giu la'antripos. When they came to Antripos, zarcha chama. The sun shone on them. Fagu zeh b'zeh. And the Jews with their entourage, the Kohen Gadol, Shimon HaTzadik, and his entourage, and Alexander the Great and his whole army, they met each other. Kevan Shirash, the Shimon HaTzadik, when Alexander saw Shimon HaTzadik, Yared mi merkavto, he gets off his chariot, and he bows in front of him. Amru lo, and his nobles, they say to Alexander, Melech Gadol Kamotcha, the greatest king, the greatest conqueror the world has ever seen. He's conquered most of the known world already. You're bowing down to this Jew? Amar lahem, and he says, why? Demut diyukno shel zeh. His countenance, his face, his vision comes before me. Minatzachat lefanai beveis milchamti. When I go out to war, it's a sign of victory. I can see that he has a connection to my victories. That's what Alexander the Great says. And they say, why did you come? It goes on, they say, these Kutiyim are saying to destroy the temple. And this is the temple that we pray for you, Alexander. We're on your side, Alexander, not the Kutiyim. So Alexander gives Shimon HaTzadik permission to do to the Kutiyim as they see fit. So what do the Jews do? They drag them by the mules up to Har Grizim. They find the Avodah Zarah on Har Grizim. They had a bird, they had a Yonah as their Avodah Zarah, and they burn their Avodah Zarah, they raise it to the ground. And so that's a temple, that's that temple being destroyed, that Avodah Zarah being destroyed, and the temple being saved is a holiday. Because of Shimon HaTzadik did that. So the Kutiyim all over Shas, are they really Jews? They converted because of the lions. So there's some, they were converts to Judaism, but some of them are forced. And later they found this idol, this Yonah, this dove on Har Grizim, and said, well, the people who are there on Har Grizim, they were really mamish doing Avodah Zarah, so we really can't consider them Jews. But for a long period of history, the Kutiyim were sort of in this Suffolk period. So it turns out that Shimon HaTzadik, who made 2 parot adumot, was a contemporary and met Alexander the Great. Now that, Rabbotai, explains it, because during the time of Alexander the Great, historically, it was about 2,300 years ago, there was massive upheaval in the world. There were wars, deaths, poverty, famine, refugees. There was a lot going on. We should never have to suffer things like this, but there were probably a lot of dead bodies that Jews came in contact with to the point where they would use up all of the para aduma that Shimon HaTzadik made early on, and they would need a second para aduma due to all of the chaos and the war going on in the days of Alexander the Great. So Baruch Hashem, we've learned the Rambam says Here Yigolei the Mashiach, and we'll have the 10th para aduma, and we've learned why Shimon HaTzadik had 2 in his days, because they're also the days of Alexander the Great. And now we're ready to actually start today's Daf Yomi. So we're Baruch Hashem. We're at the top of Yud Beis. Still, we have plenty of time, Rabbi, plenty of time. It says, Halacha, Dalet. Here's the Mishnah. Hamakdish nechasav. Someone is makdish, he donates, he makes kadosh nechasav, his property, to the temple. And the Korban Eda and the Tikun Chadim, they both say, Stam Hekdeshos, we're going to see, is Lebedek Habayis. If he does not explain where he wants his property to go, then it should go to Bedek Habayit, the building fund, the upkeep fund. We're going to see the meaning of this. Hayu behen devarim re'uyim lekarbonot, and there are among his property things that can be the karbonot tzibor, for the public offering. The Tiklin Chadin says, Begemara Yefarsh, we're going to explain in the Gemara. You often see Rashi does this. In the Bavli, Rashi often says on the Mishnah, we're going to explain it in the Gemara. So sometimes a good teacher has to know, okay, I know we have a question, so we're going to wait on the question because the Gemara is going to explain it. So we'll get there. Yenatnu le'umnin, so what do? You give this item to the craftsmen who work for the Mikdash, b'scharan, as their wages, Divri Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo Ben Azai, but Ben Azai disagrees. He says, Aina heya mida, that's not the status of these items. Ele mafrishin mehen schar umnim, you separate out of these items wages for the craftsmen. Umechalolin otan alamaut, and then you're machalo these items on maut umnin, on their personal coins. And you give it to the craftsmen bescharan as their wages, but then v'chozrin, and then the temple goes back lochin, and you buy it back from the umnin ota mitruma chadasha, from the new coins, from the new half shekel coins they get. And we saw this yesterday. This was what to do with the leftover ketoret. If there's leftovers that were bought with last year's money, you can't use whatever is bought for last year's carbon sibor for this year's carbon sibor, because it was used from last year's money. So you would give it to the umnin as a wages, then you'd use the tiklin chadatin, the new shekels that come in for this year, and you'd use that to buy it back. So now the kedusha from your new shekels goes to pay the craftsman, and you're buying back the ketoris, or whatever it is from last year. Now you can recycle it. That's how they did ancient recycling, but you're really recycling the kedusha. You have the new kedusha from this year's coins onto the ketoret, so you can use it this year. So next halacha in the Mishnah, hamakdish nechasav. He's makdish. He consecrates all his property. V'haya behen behema ru'ya al gabei mizbeach. And among them are animals that could go on the mizbeach. Zacharim nekevot, both male and female animals. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Zacharim yemachar. He says, what do? The male animals, we sell them letzorchei olot, to people who need to bring a carbon ola. So if Shimmy needs to bring an ola, he would buy one of these animals from Bedek Habayis and use it for his ola. And the kevot, the female animals, yemachu letzorchei zivchei shlamim. You sell to people who need to bring a shlamim, because a shlamim can be brought from a female as well. Udmehem, and the money from selling these animals, yiplu im shar nechasav, it goes with the rest of his personal property, lebedek Habayis. So everything, all the proceeds go to Bedek Habayis. The animals themselves end up on the mizbeach, but not as the carbon of the original donor, as someone else's carbon. And the money from those, everything goes together to Bedek Habayis. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Yeshua disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer. He says, Zacharim atzman yikravu olos. The Zacharim, the male animals themselves, can be olot, so we're going to put them up on the mizbeach as an ola, even though the mizbeach gets its funding not from Bedek Habayis. And the kevos, yimachru letzorchei zivchei shlamim. And the female animals, you'll sell them for people who need to bring a shlamim, which can be a female animal. V'yavi b'tmehem olot, and you use that money. That money doesn't go to Bedek Habayis, according to Yeshua. It's used to buy more male animals to bring olot. Shar nechasim, and everything else that wasn't an animal that go on the mizbeach, yiblu the Bedek Habayis. So it comes out that the donor is really giving his money to Bedek Habayis, but the animals really end up going as an ola on the mizbeach. Male animals directly, and female animals indirectly are sold to bring an ola on the mizbeach. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Roa Aniyah Divrei Eliezer, Divrei Yeshua. So Rabbi Akiva says, I like the words of Eliezer better. Why? Rabbi Eliezer, Hishva Spitosav. Rabbi Eliezer says everything's going to the same place. Everything ends up in Bedek Habayis. Sure, you have to sell the animals, but all the money ends up in Bedek Habayis. Rabbi Yeshua, Cholak. Rabbi Yeshua is chilek. He says that some of the value ends up on the Mizbeach, and some of the value ends up in Bedek Habayis, but they don't go to the same place. Amar Rav Papayas. This is not Rav Papa, this is Rav Papayas. Shemati Divrei Shnehem. I hear both of their words. Hamakdish beferish, someone who's makdish beferish. And the Korban Eda says, what does he say? He actually says, Behema unasachai lehekdesh. He's saying my animals and my property is going to hekdesh. This is in the Karban Eda, to Kevan Shehavrisha V'Hivdilan, because he's separating them and dividing them zo from each other. And even so, lo amar behema lemizbeach. He doesn't say the behema should go up on the mizbeach, to the altar. Nachased lebedek bayis, and the other property should go to the temple fund, to the building fund. Shamina, and so we learn from his words, Shadaito, Shehakol Yelech El Makom Echad, that everything should go to one place. He says the Behema and the Chasai should all go to one place. Lebedek Abayis, because Stam Hakdesh Shult, remember, it's the Bedek Abayis. Aval, this is still in the Karban Eda, Hamakdish Stam. If he's Makdish Stam, Kol Nechasav, Amrina Shadaito Lahakdish, Kol Davar Lemashu Roi. If he just says Stam, he doesn't separate out his animals and his property, then maybe when he's makdish everything, he wants his animals to go to the mizbeach, like Rabbi Yeshua, and he wants his other property to go to Bedek Habayit, like Rabbi Yeshua says. So that's what Rabbi Papa says. It's interesting. This is not Rav Papa. Have we seen Rav Papa in the Gemara in Shekalim? No. Who else didn't we see? Anybody? Who do we see on every daf in Bavli? Two guys. Beautiful. I hear Reish Lakish, I hear Abaya, I hear Rava. They're missing. Rabbi Shimon, we're going to have Rabbi Shimon, don't worry. Rabbi Shimon's coming. Abai and Rav are missing. Why are Abai and Rav missing? Because this is Yerushalmi, Rabbotai. Yerushalmi was composed orally, of course, about 200 years before the Bavli. And the Gemara teaches us that Abaye and Rava were 70 years after Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is the central figure in Talmud Yerushalmi. He was Mora Atra in Yerushalayim for many, many years. He was actually a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he says, Rabbi Yochanan says he was in the 17th row of students before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and Rav was in the front row. So Rav shows up here, Rav's contemporary Shmuel shows up here, but Abaye and Rava and Rabba and Rav Papa was 70 years later. That's a couple generations later in Bavel. And the Bavli, of course, was composed maybe a while after, a few generations after Abai and Rava themselves. So Abai and Rava don't show up, so we miss them a little bit. We get back to the Bavli, we miss them. But Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of new names, so it's interesting to see new names. But Rabbi Yochanan, of course, is a very central figure. He was the Mordach in Eretz Yisrael for many years, he had a long life, so he's a central figure here. There's a lot of Rabbi Yochanan we're going to see. So that's Rabbi Papias. So he says, Shemati et Divrei Shnehem, as the Karban Eda explained, Maktish Bepeirush, as I just read from Karban Eda, Kedivri Rabbi Eliezer, and Maktish Stam, Kedivri Yeshua. Because if he's Stam, then he wants whatever's Roi to go to the Mizbeach, to be on the Mizbeach, and whatever's not, to be Lebedek Abayis. So final halacha in the Mishnah, Maktish Nechasav, someone's Maktish Nechasav, Ahyu Behen Devarim Re'uli, Megabe Mizbeach, and there's other things that could go on the Mizbeach, like Yenot, Shmani, Me'ofot, wine, oil, and birds, those all end up on the Mizbeach. Rabbi Eliezer, this should actually be Rabbi Elazar. We're going to see in Amud Beis when the Gemara cites this, it says Rabbi Elazar, because Rabbi Eliezer would not agree to this from the Reish of the Mishnah, but this should be Rabbi Elazar Omer, Machur L'tzorchei Oto Min. You sell it for the needs of that type. V'yabi b'dmehem olot. So you would sell the oil to someone who needs to bring oil on his mincha. You sell the birds to someone who needs to bring kinim on the mizbeach, and then you bring olot. Shar nechazim yilu lebedek habayit. So this last halacha in the Mishnah from Rabbi Elazar should be is following Rabbi Yeshua, that you sell the things that could go on the mizbeach to people who need that, and you bring olot. You bring olot on the mizbeach, because if he's makdish something for the mizbeach should get that. That's the shita of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara says, Hamakdish, the carbonot tzibur. So now they can explain what does it mean, carbonot tzibur. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kitoret. So remember, this is yesterday's. We explained, if there's leftover ketoret, you could pay the workers with it and then buy it back from tiklin chantin, from the new shekels, so you can use that ketoret this year. So Amar Rav Hoshaya, Tiftor, let's explain our Mishnah. Be'uman mishal beit of Tinas. This is someone who works, someone who's a member of a household of the Beit of Tinas, who had the secret of pituma ketoret. They knew Rabbi say how to make ketoret, and they carefully guarded that secret. So he actually is a member of this household Beit of Tinas. He makes the ketoret, and they pay him with the leftover ketoret. Shahaya noto b'schar ketoret. He gets paid in ketoret. And what happened was, before they could go ahead and use the new shekels and buy it back from him to deconsecrate the shekels and reconsecrate the ketoret, he went ahead and he was makdish. So he works making ketoret, then he was makdish the ketoret that they paid him with before they bought it back from him with the new shekels. My time in the Ben Azai, and what's the reasoning of Ben Azai? Shein hektish mischalal malacha elamaz. So Ben Azai says hektish does not is not mischalo simply on his work. That was the first opinion. That was Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, in the first line of the Mishnah. that Rabbi Akiva says you can pay him directly in the Ketoris, and then you can just buy it back. He says no, you have to get his money. Ben Azai disagrees with Rabbi Akiva, says you have to take his money, which is chulin, and consecrate the Ketoris, deconsecrate the Ketoris onto that, not onto his malacha. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says his malacha has value, and the source for this is Asuli Mikdash. We saw yesterday in the Mephoshim, Asuli Mikdash Shechanti B'tocham, that our asiya, our malacha, can be kadosh. That would be the shita of Rabbi Akiva, that when you do a malacha l'shem shemayim, that can have actual kedusha. You don't need something physical to generate the kedusha. That our malacha, all of our avodah l'shem shemayim, can generate a kedusha that then it can be transferred over to the ketoret, or to the new shekels. So Taman Tanina, and there's a Mishnah over there. This is a Mishnah in Tzumura 31, and it says Yesh b'kodesh bedek habayit. There are milot, there are special circumstances by kodesh bedek habayit, by the temple treasury, the building fund. Shestam hekdesh lebedek habayit. That if someone is makdish stam, and that's of course our Mishnah, he does not specify where it goes to. That goes to bedek habayit. And hekdesh bedek habayit chal al hakol. Hekdesh bedek habayit can take effect on anything. Here they say even rocks, even dirt, even things that normally have no shaychus to the mizbeach, they can become bedek habayit. Molin bigedulehen, and it's me'ila in what grows out of them. Now, of course, we've had a machloket in zvachim. What if you were makdish your chatas, it's a female animal, and then it got pregnant? So there was a whole machloket if ubar yerach imo. Remember from 2 years ago, if the vlad, the embryo, the fetus inside this animal would get the same kedusha of the mother. If it had to get a mum before you could redeem it, things like it, they were nafkamina. But here, the Tikla Chadin says these are the eggs or the milk. If he was makdish birds or chickens, there would actually be me'ilah on the eggs. If makdish a cow, then in the milk that belongs to the temple treasury, there's me'ilah on these items. Ein bahem hanoi lekohanim, and there's no enjoyment for the kohanim from bedek habayit. So of course you're going to say the kohanim enjoy from the mizbeach. Sure they do. Most of the karbanot or baltai, the kohanim eat from the meat, or they're given portions of the animal, the chazi and shok, and even an olah, which should all go to the mizbeach, the kohanim get what? The hide. So the kohanim get enjoyment from every type of animal that goes on the mizbeach, but from bedek habayit, it's asur. It's asur me'ilah, it's asur behana. There's nothing for the kohanim. Amar Rav Chananya de Rabbi Eliezer he. This Mishnah in Tzumura matches our opinion of Rabbi Eliezer here. Rabbi Eliezer is Eliezer. So sometimes they abbreviate Eliezer as Eliezer. I'm not sure if they're trying to avoid writing an aleph and a lamed next to each other. They weren't really writing it down when they spoke it out, so I'm not sure what the reason was. Maybe it was a nickname. Titaninan, that we learn in our Mishnah, he says, why is this Rabbi Eliezer? Hamakdish nachasa v'haita behen behem al gabe mizbeach. This should sound familiar. We just read this 5 minutes ago. This is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Zacharim in the kavot. There's males and females. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Zacharim yimachar letzorchei olot. The male animals you sell to other men who need to bring an olah. It could be a man or a woman who needs to bring an olah. And the female animals you sell to someone who needs to bring a shlamim, dmehem yiplu im shar nachasav lebedek habayit. Remember, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion was everything ends up in bedek habayit. The animals you sell them to people who need to bring a carbon, but everything ends up in bedek habayit at the end of the day. Where Rabbi Yeshua said no, the animals end up as olot, and the other things that are not animals end up in bedek habayit. Rabbi Yochanan, Taima de Rabbi Eliezer. So what's the reasoning behind Rabbi Eliezer? He says it's a pasuk, Ish ki yakdish et beito kodesh l'Hashem. When a man is makdish his house, it becomes kodesh to Hashem. It becomes kodesh as bedek habayit. B'ma anan kaimin. How do we interpret, how do we understand this pasuk? Im b'bayit dira mamish. If it's really his house. There's another pasuk for that. The next pasuk in the Torah says, Kavar Kativ, he says it's already written, V'ish Ve'im makdish, if he consecrates his house, yigol et beito, he can redeem his house. Remember, he has a year to redeem his house in the walled city. V'yasef chamishit kesef erkecha Allah v'chayla. He adds on, when he redeems, he adds on 1/5, and he can buy his house back. So the first pasuk, ish ki yakdish et beito, is not his house mamish, because the next pasuk is talking about really his house. Ela ki anan kaimin. How do we understand this? Makdish nachasav. That's the property in his house. Mekan shestam hekdesh lebedek habayit. So from here we know that stam makdish, because it says ish ki yakdish et beito. We talk about the things in his house, his nachasim. So stam, if he doesn't specify, it goes to lebedek habayit. So it doesn't say this is for the mizbeach, this is for a specific cause. We're going to learn there were various shofarot, there were various other collections and boxes that they had for specific needs. But if he doesn't explain where he wants the money to go, it goes to bedek habayit. Amar Rabbi Zeira. And Rav Kuna b'Shem Rav b'ma pligon. What do they disagree? When do they have this machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua? but maktish nachasav, when he's maktish his nachasim. He says nachasai to bedek abayis. He says he's maktish nachasim. Aval maktish edro, eder is his flock. What if he's maktish his flock instead of everything? He's just maktish his animals. Kol ama modai, all of them agree, shahu the mizbeach, that the animals should go on the mizbeach. Like Rabbi Yeshua says. Rebbe Ba, Rav Huna, Beshem Rav, he says, Ma Pligin, where did Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua disagree really? But Maktish Edro, they disagree when he's Maktish his Edro, that still Rabbi Eliezer would say it should go to Bedek Habayis, it should be sold, the animals will be sold, people who need the carbonot, and all the money, the value will go to Bedek Habayis. For Maktish Nachasav, Kol Amma Modai, but when they're Maktish Nachasim generally, Modai should be Bedek Habayis. He says even Rabbi Yeshua would agree that it should go to Bedek Habayis, even the animals. Al daite de Rabbi Zera. So according to this opinion of Rabbi Zera, nicha, it sounds good. The kashe al de Rabbi Ba, and it's a kashe when Rabbi Ba says, behema lo lemizbeachi. Isn't a behema going to mizbeach? How can you tell me that they agree that the behema would always go to bedek habayis? If he's maktish nachasim, a behema should go to bedek habayis. A behema should go on the mizbeach. It says behema mizbeachi. Yes, it's true. A behema should go on the mizbeach. V'lama sata ma'isha zeh. Why did this donor, who's making the donation of his nachasim, say stam all of his nachasim? It's as if he's saying, Lo ye ele lebedek habayis. I don't want it to go rather only to bedek habayis. Even though he's saying he's got animals among his property, but he's saying my nachasim go to be hektish, go to the temple, whichever verbiage he's using, he doesn't specify. So he wants everything, even the animals, to end up going to bedek habayis. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Loshna. We don't make a distinction. He maktish nechasim, he maktish edro, he machlokes. He says that the machlokes in the Mishnah, it doesn't matter whether he says nechasim or eder. There's still a machloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer would say everything ends up going to bedek habayit, even if you have to sell the animals first. And Rabbi Yeshua says the animals are going to end up on the mizbeach as olot. The females will be sold to bring olot, and the males directly, and everything else that's not an animal will go into bedek habayit. So skip the parentheses. Rav Huna b'shem Rav, Rebbe Abahu b'shem Rebbe Yochanan say kodshe bedek habayit shepodin, something that is in the building fund that you're podeh, you redeem it. So remember, if you're the one who was makdish it, you have to add on chamishit, like the din of the bayit. We see you have to add on 1/5 extra, but someone else could buy it at normal value, face value from the temple. The temple would estimate how much it's worth and would auction items off if they needed the money. So tamimim, even if they are tam, they're an animal that is without a mum. Yatsu lechulin, they go out to chulin, meaning you could use them. You could use them for anything. Even though these animals were in bedek habayit, they were in the temple treasury, and you've bought them back from the temple treasury. So both you can use them like chulin. You can have them for dinner. Matznitzin amra ken. And our Mishnah, there is a Mishnah that says like this. It says vladon vechalban mutter. It says their offspring and their milk is mutter lachar pidyonan, after the pidyon. Before I turn the page, there's actually, the Tiklin Chalatin gets into this, and he says, how is this a proof? Because that Mishnah is really talking about what was Kodshe Mizbeach, when someone was Podeh Kodshe Mizbeach, and it had a mum. That's when their Vlad and their Chalav is mutter. Because normally what happens, I'll explain outside, because he's wordy here. He says, okay, he makes a comparison. Normally what happens is if you're maktish something to the Mizbeach, you have an animal that's supposed to go up on the Mizbeach, and then you can't podeh at tam. You have to wait till it gets a mum. So it's yiru ad sheyistayv. It goes out to graze. It gets a mum. Then you redeem it, but it's still aser begiza avoda. You could eat the animal, but you can't have any disrespect to it. You can't work it. You can't have it pulling your plow. You can't shear the sheep and take the wool. It's aser minatora begiza avoda, because it was rawi for the mizbeach. And things that are going on the mizbeach, you can't have disrespect for them. So even after it gets a mum, you podeh, you could eat it, but you can't work it or shear it. So the Tiklin Chalatin makes a comparison to bedek habayit, which doesn't have deraita, this isser of giza voda. So with deraita, you really could do shear it and work it after you redeem it. So we see it's more mekel than something that was makdish to the mizbeach. And so if you redeem it, even as a tam, you should be able to work it. It should be chulin legamre. So turning over, so we're going to get into this a little deeper. Rav Chizkiya b'shem Rav Chisda Tifater, he explains it like this. What happened? Shepodon tmimim. He was podeh these animals from bedek habayis. He bought them back. V'humamu, and then they got a mum. So now they're chulin legamre. But he's holding that if they were tam, if they were bedek habayit and they were tam, you shouldn't be able to work them and shear them. They're not like chulin legamre. They should be, as a gezerah, we're going to see it's a gezerah d'Rabbanan, that
an animal you buy back from Bedek Habayit or Bosai should have the same status, derabanan, as an animal you bought back from Kodesh Mizbeach. So like Kodesh Mizbeach has Isser Gizav Avoda, you can eat it but after it has a mum, but you can't use it for working and shearing. So too, there's no working and shearing on an animal that's tam, that you bought back from Bedek Habayis, even though it was never Kodesh Mizbeach. So you have to wait till it gets a mum, and then it's Chulin Legamre. Rabbi Yosef B'Shem Rav Chisda, Mas Nisan Amraken. He says there's a Mishnah like this: Vladan v'chalban asur la'achar b'dyonan. He said, and that's over there in Tzibur. It says if it was kodesh mizbeach, its offspring and its milk is asur after your podeyet, if it does not have a mum. Rabbi Chizkiya b'Shem Rabbi Yosa kodesh bedek habayis shepadon t'mimim. He says kodesh bedek habayis shepadon t'mimim, that you redeem them when they're tam yatzu l'chulin. They have to be going out to chulin. So he disagrees. He says they have to be chulin. Why? In Tamar, if you're going to tell me lo yatsa l'chulin, they don't become chulin legamre. Heich kodesh mizbech cholin o kodesh bedek habayis. So what's going on is our Mishnah says that someone was makdish his nechasim, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, other people buy them from bedek habayis and use them for an olah. So if it still has some remnant kedusha, some residual isurim from being bedek habayis, if it's still usher. If the milk is usher, the vlad is usher, it's usher begiza avoda, because it was once belonged to hektish, it belonged to bedek habayis. How could they go and turn around and make that into kodesh mizbeach and use it for their olah, if it's a male, or for their shlamim, if it's a female? So he says it has to be that when the original donor is makdish his nechasim, and then bedek habayis sells them to other people who need to bring a carbon, has to be when they sell it, it's mamish, it's chulin legamre. There's no residual isurim like we have by kodesh mizbeach, that it's free and clear. So it's bought free and clear, and now they can turn around and be makdish it as their olah or their shlamim, and it works. And he says, Bale mumim kodesh mizbeach chol alehem liyada milah. So when we talk about kodesh mizbeach that are bal mum, that is podeh, so why do they have an isser on them? It's an isser derabanan legizal avoda. So an animal that goes on, that's kodesh mizbeach, that's a tam, is asur deraisa begizal avoda. But once it's a bal mum and you redeem it, you're not allowed to redeem tam, it belongs to the mizbeach. But once it's a bal mum and you redeem it, you buy it back from the mizbeach, it's asur giza voda derabanan only. And so to here, it's more chamor than bedek habayis. Once he's saying once you buy back bedek habayis from the gizbar, from the treasury, then it's free and clear from everything, and that's why, because there are no residual problems, no residual isurim, that someone else can turn around and be makdish it as their olah or as their shlamim and go ahead and use it. So here's a wrinkle on making an animal kaddish. Hifrish nekeva leolaso. Someone is mafresh an animal which is female to become his carbon olah. Ula pischo, or for his pesach. Ula ashamo, or for his asham. Now, Abro said all of these need a male animal. We learned by Pesach has to be a male goat or sheep in the first year. And by an olah has to be a male animal, and the asham also an animal, a male, not a female. Ose tamura, but he says it could still make a tamura. Now, what's the deal with a tamura? Is if anyone, Ploni Almoni is makdish an animal to the mizbeach, then he changes his mind. He regrets it. He says, you know what, that animal was too big, I want to give him a smaller one. Or even he says the other way. He says that this animal is a little skinny, I'll give them the fatter one instead. So he says, this fat animal will be in place of the skinny animal for my shlamim. No. It's asur deraisa to do that. You can't do that. And the Torah says what happens? Hayahu utmarto ye kodesh. That both him and its substitute are kodesh. So Rabbi said, by the way, this is why Yitzchak Avinu never left Eretz Yisrael. Because he was a tzmura. He was kodesh. He was designated as a carbon, and then his father Avram switched in the aisle for Yitzchak, but even though Yitzchak wasn't sacrificed, he was still a tzmura. So he was kadosh, and he couldn't leave the Eretz HaKadosh. By the way. but the tzmura is isur to do, even if you're improving, even if it's a step up, it's still isur to do it. But the first animal, in order to make a tzmura with the second animal, the first animal had to be appropriate, had to have what we call kedushas haguf. So we see from here, it's a devar musar also, that even if, for example, I'll use myself as an example, even if during tefillah you didn't have a lot of kavana before, maybe your phone the ringer was on, you weren't paying attention so much, and then you decided, listen, I gotta really focus. I really got to focus during davening, turn the phone off, really try to look at the words, understand what I'm saying, and you regret the tefillah you did before. That tefillah wasn't very good. I regret that. Rabbosai, it was still kadosh. Maybe it wasn't as good as your tefillah today. Maybe yesterday's tefillah wasn't as good as today's Shemona Esrei, but it was still kadosh. You can't regret that. Even if you're making it tomorrow, even if now you're doing better, don't regret your learning and your davening and your mitzvah that you did before. It's still kaddish. It wasn't the best. You can do better, but it's still kaddish. So every effort we put into avodat Hashem, we see it has a kedusha, even if now we feel like we're doing so much better than we did last week or last year. So you see, it's a davar musar still. So thank you. So what's going on is it has to have kedusha to goof. It has to be appropriate and be kaddish in the goof of the animal in order to make another animal into a tamura. Rabbi Shimon Omer, he says this only applies le'olato ose tamura. If he separates a female for his original ola, then it could make a tamura. But if he separates a female for his pesach or his asham, it can't make a tamura. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon. So he says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the ola tola pischo. If he separates a female for his ola or for his pesach, l'shamo, or for his asham even, eino ose tzmora. It can't make a tzmora at all. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, taimod Rabbi Shimon. What's the reason of Rabbi Shimon, who allows, if he separates a female for his ola, that it could make a tzmora, that has kedusha to goof, that it was appropriate as a carbon, even though normally a female cannot be an ola. Sheken matzinu nekeva ba'of, because a female bird can indeed become an ola. We know by birds it's actually switched around. We saw this a little bit when we were learning Nida, we were learning about Azava, we were learning about Kini, and we saw this a bit, that it's switched. By animals, Ola has to be a male, and a Chatas has to be a female. By birds, it's switched. By birds, it's the opposite gender. So we see that even back then there's some fluidity by Karbanot. So he's saying because a female bird could be an Ola, then so too, a female animal separated as an Ola could make Tamura. It can't be an Ola Mamish. You're not going to bring a female as an Ola Afpam Lo. It's never going to happen. But it can make a Tamura that when he substitutes a male animal in, they both have Kedusha. Because the original had Kedusha to Guf. So we see that Ola, a Nekeva Ba'of is Keshera. Lavo Ola, can become an Ola. Rabbi Yochanan, time of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, reasoning behind Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, it's interesting, Rabbi say that Rabbi Yochanan says, Taima, you know what? He's explaining the other shitas. He's explaining them. But you know what word we don't see at all? We haven't seen this in Shekalim yet. Meisive, kasha, tiyuvta. Isn't that funny? We haven't seen that. We've seen the word tifater. Let's explain it. We've seen the word yaus. That sounds nice. That's good. And we've seen taima. I'll explain his reasoning. So it's a very strange thing. So Yerushalmi is actually very different. And there's a reason for this. In Yerushalmi, there was a different type of learning where they were trying, not so much trying to what we call in Spanish, upschlag. Okay, it's yeshivish. Upschlag, you're trying to get the other guy. They're saying, well, can I explain him? So that's what they do the Mishnah. Well, tifater the Mishnah. We're not going to have a kasha on the Mishnah. We're not going to have a meisive on the Mishnah like we do in Bavli. We're going to try to explain the Mishnah. Now, there's an amazing Gemara, and it's in Bava Metzia Pei Hey. And in that Gemara, I have it on my phone, but I'll just say it outside. It's beautiful. That Rabbi Zera fasted 100 fasts before he left Bavel for Eretz Yisrael. Why? Rabbi say you'll love this. Why did Rabbi Zera fast 100 times? Anyone know? To forget his method of learning. It says to forget the Gemara Bavla, to forget the Babylonian Gemara. Now, Gemara is the methodology, the learning, the tiyufta, the kasha, the upschlag. I have a kasha on you. I have a shtickle problem with your shita. Rabbi Zera was going to Eretz Yisrael. He knew in Eretz Yisrael that wasn't their method of learning. That wasn't how they learned in their yeshiva. Instead, they were saying, well, I'll explain your taima. I'll tifater, yaus. It's nice what you're saying. Why? Because I have more support for that. I'll give you the reason for what you're saying. There's a pasuk that supports you. It's a whole different madrega. It's a whole different methodology of learning. So Rabbi Zera had to fast to forget not what he learned, chas v'shalom. We never want to forget what we learned, but to get out of that headspace, to get out of that mode of learning where I'm looking to undermine your logic with another source. I'm looking for a brisa that is a kasha on the Mishnah, and that brisa is going to clarify the Mishnah because I have a kasha, and I got to figure it out, and I got to see where this is wrong, and you're wrong, and this is not correct, and I got to figure out the details. Instead, in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, their method was, I'll find a pasuk that supports you. Let's explain the Mishnah like this, and you can be right, and I can be right. There's another Gemara that reinforces this, and it's in Brachos Chavches, Brachos Koach, and it's very famous. You're going to remember it once I say it. It's very famous. It was only a year and a half ago, everybody, we were learning this Gemara in Brachos Chavches. It's in Tfilas HaShachar, and there's a machlokes, very famous, if you have to daven Ma'ariv. Tfilas HaArvis Reshus Oy Chova. And Rabban Gamliel said Chova, Yeshua says Reshus. There's a big machlokes, And they said, Rabbi Yeshua, you're going to stand up on your feet, and they'll testify about you that you said Rishus, and I say Chova, and you can't. It was a struggle over rabbinical authority. You should go back and review Brachos Chavches and Perek Tfilas Shachar. It's a defining moment in centralizing rabbinical authority. Rabbi Gamliel says, Rabbi Yeshua, I'm not going to tolerate your publicly disagreeing with my shita. You'll stand on your feet. They'll testify about you. But he says, Hamten ad shialo balei trisin. Wait until the shield bearers come to the Beis Midrash. The shield bearers, the Mefarshim say, a shield bearer is one who defends their opinion or defends someone else's opinion. Balei trisin is dafka trisin, because we know from Shabbos, not that long ago, we said, what can you go out with? And they listed all these weapons of war, the club and the sword and the spear and the bow and the tris. And the tris was a large shield. Now, a large shield defends not only you, but the men behind you. So the Balei Tris in Yerushalayim, in the Beis Midrash, they would look for defense for someone else's opinion. So basically, Rabbi Gamliel was saying, it's not so harsh when we think of it this way. Rabbi Gamliel was saying, we're going to wait until the Balei Trisi and the shield bearers, the Talmidei Chachamim, who know what they're talking about, maybe they can defend you. But if not, then Rabbi Yeshua, you're in trouble. Remember that this was the whole struggle of authority, and actually deposed Rabbi Gamliel for a time, and they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and that's when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says his famous line, Harei ani kiven shivim shona. He says he was only 18 years old. He was appointed to be the nasi, to be the head of the yeshiva, and he says, I'm as if I'm 70 years old, and it was a miracle. They gave him white hair so he would look more dignified and authoritative, even though he's only 18. That was that event. That was the event, that machlokis over tfilas arvis, and the takeaway message is the Balei Trisin. In Eretz Yisrael, in the yeshiva, they were looking to shield someone else's opinion. They were looking to support it, like Rabbi Yochanan does here. He says the time. He says, what's the tam? I'll bring a pasuk to support you. I'll explain your reasoning, because maybe not everyone understands it. We have the word yaus here. We never have the word yaus or yaut, however you want to pronounce it, which means like, that's nice. It's like shkoyach, that's nice, and I'll bring more support for you. We never see that in Bavli. We see that in Yerushalmi. It's a whole different madrega, so we should really appreciate it when we have this. And coming right after Pesach, Pesach is a time of achdus, a time of getting together, every Jew together in the Chatzar Beis Hamikdash to bring our Korban Pesach, God willing, soon. And Yerushalmi has this sort of achdus to it. So it's beautiful. So that was a good spiel. But Baruch Hashem, back to the Gemara. Thank God, we have time to go on field trips here. So Rabbi Yochanan is explaining the time of Rabbi Shimon. Sheken Metzino Kevav Ov Kasher Levo Ola. Good Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Time of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, who cited Rabbi Shimon? Im min b'mino hu chaluk. If we differentiate between the same species, alav kol sheken mim she'eino mino. So certainly we differentiate between a different species or a different type. Here meaning males and females. And we're going to explain this in a minute. Now min b'mino is usually a term in kashrus, meaning the same taste. We're going to see what he means here. Ezehu min b'mino. What is one species in its own type? Shu chalakalav, that we do differentiate, that they don't all get kedushas aguf to make tamura. Kihada, it's like this teaching. Ditane, like the Brisa says, asham ben shana. If he needs to bring an asham that's 1 year old, a 1 year old asham is what he has to bring. The heavy ben shtayim, and he brings a 2 year old. So it's not yatsa. The parentheses, please ignore. Ben shtayim, he has to bring a 2 year old asham, heavy ben shalosh, and he has to bring a ben shalosh. Lo yatsa, actually the gra is a different girsa. The gra's girsa here is kasher, ela shelo alu the bailim l'shem chova. So he says the carbon itself is kosher if the asham it's sort of the opposite of mechusar zman. It's too old. We saw this by the Pesach. A Pesach, like it's too old also, is not fit as a Pesach. He has to recycle it as shlamim. But here is asham is too old, and the girsa of the gra is it's still a valid carbon. He still brings the carbon, but he has to go back and bring another asham in the correct age. Tiklin Chadjin explains, he says, Asham ben Shana, Asham ben Shtei Shanim, Asham Gezelos and Me'ilos. He says that's it for Gezela and Me'ilah, for Shifra Harufa, or for a Shifra who was designated to a certain man, he needs an Asham that's 2 years old. So he brings a 3 year old, it's not going to work for that obligation. Tichsiv Bahu Ayil, because it says Ayil. Ayil is a mature ram. Ayil we usually translate as ram. Asham ben Shana, a 1 year old Asham Nazir, that's a Nazir that got Tameh, or a Mitzora that ends his Tzorat. Tichsivahu Kevis, and that's by a Kevis. A Kevis is a young one. So we see that bringing a 2 year old for the sake of a 1 year old is not valid, even though a 2 year old animal is what's needed for the other type of Ashamos, for the Gzela, Mila, and Shifra Harufa. Now remember, this is our trivia question. Is there a sheep that you can't bring for either? is there an in-between? It's a very funny word. In between an ayil and a kevis. It's going way back. It's 2 years ago, going back to Zvachim. There is something, a sheep that enters its 12th month. It's 1-year-old sheep, but it's not yet 13 months old. So it's in its first month of its second year of life. Anyone remember what it's called? Anyone? I think I heard it. Polgas. It's called a Polgas. Shkoyach, representing midfield road. Shkoyach, wow. Proud of you. A Polgas, Rabbosai, is this it's teenager. It's a teenager ram. It's not yet a ram, and it's not quite a shepsela. It's kind of in between. And it's sort of, we have the same concept by human beings. We're going to see in Nedarim, Mufla Samach La'ish. He's a 12-and-a-half-year-old boy who knows what he's talking about. We let him make a neder. We examine him. Can he make it? He's smart enough to make a neder. Okay, he's not an ish yet. He's not 13, but he's a mufla. He can make a neder, samach lish, close to being an ish. And he's nishtachi nishtacher, as we say. He's not really a kid, and he's not really an adult. So as we know, teenagers are a species to themselves. So there's a makor for that. That concept is right here in the Torah. It's called a palgas. It's in between an ayil and a kevis. So Baruch Hashem, so if you bring something that's the wrong year, so Rabbi Shimon says it's not kedushas haguf, and therefore it can't make a tzmura. So how could a female then, which is, this is the same animal, different year, doesn't become kedushas haguf and can't make a tzmura? So how could a female possibly make a tzmura? So that's Rabbi Yochanan explaining the reasoning behind Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, after the parentheses, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yeshua, Shneim Amru Davar Echad. So Rabbi Shimon here, who says it does not get kedushas haguf and can't make a tzmura, is the same as Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnah. And he's going to explain why. Kema de Rabbi Yeshua Amar, like Rabbi Yeshua said, nekeva le'ola, lo kidsha, that a nekeva does not become kadosh as an ola. What did Rabbi Yeshua say in our Mishnah? It says someone is makdish his nachasim to the temple. He says the animals, we're going to sell them and bring olas. He says the male animals become ola directly, but the female animals, you have to sell them, and with the money, you bring an ola. But they don't have kedusha as an ola. Because you have to sell them first and buy male animals to bring the ola. Ela hektish damim. They have what's called hektish damim. They have kedusha only for their value. They have kedusha. It's really kedusha lemizbeach ledamim only. They're not kadosh to the mizbeach as an animal because it's a female. We need to bring an ola. Why? Because he's makdish olas nachasim. We don't want him to bring a shlamim because then he's going to eat it for lunch. So that would kind of betray the purpose of being makdish olas nachasim. So we're going to sell it and bring an ola. So that's kedushas damim. Mizbeach, we call here hektish damim. Ken Rabbi Shimon Amar. This is what Rabbi Shimon is saying also, as just explained, nekeva le'ola lo kidsha. If he tries to be makdish his nekeva as an ola, not a male bird, but a male animal, does not become kadosh, ela hektish damim. It has only hektish damim. You would sell it and then use the money to bring a male animal as an ola. In Tamar, because if you're going to tell me, in Tamar, same way as saying im tomar, so you see in Babli, in Tamar, kach kedusha zaguf. If you tell me it gets a kedusha zaguf, yiru, it should have to go out and graze until it gets a mum, and then he would sell it, and then he would bring ola. But we don't see that in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, it's very direct. Rabbi Yeshua says the ola you bring directly, and the males you bring directly as an ola, and the nekevot you sell them, and you bring a shlamim directly. You don't have to wait until they go out into pasture and get a mum, and then sell them. So you see, they don't have kedusha saguf. So they wouldn't be able to make tamura according to Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yeshua would agree. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Ani Ro'eh, as divrei Rabbi Shimon, b'Pesach. I agree with Rabbi Shimon by Pesach, that a Pesach, if he designated a female to be his Pesach, it does not become Kadosh as Kedusha Saguf and cannot make a tamura. Why? Shemota Pesach b'Shlamim. A leftover Pesach, as we saw recently in Masechus Pesachim, a leftover Pesach becomes a Shlamim. V'leima, so why doesn't Rabbi also add, Einani Ro'eh divrei Rabbi Shimon b'Asham? I don't agree with Rabbi Shimon by the Asham, because an asham could be male or female. Shemoter asham ba'ola, because a leftover asham becomes an ola. So if he designates a female for his asham, then the leftover will become an ola, and a female can never become an ola, so he'd have to sell it. It does not have kedushas guf lemizbeach, it has kedushas damim lemizbeach, it has to be sold, and then you use the money to bring an ola lemizbeach. Amar Rabbi Avin explains why he doesn't disagree there. Im hittish Pesach, if he's makdish for his Pesach, ba shlamim, gufo karev shlamim. So he has a Pesach that's left over. Remember the case, they had a Pesach and they lost the Pesach. So the Chabura lost the Pesach, or someone lost the Pesach. Remember he said, wait for me, I'm looking for the Pesach, and if I don't come back, you'll bring the Pesach on my behalf too. We had these a couple months ago. But they found it, they bought a second animal to replace the first one, then they got the first one back. So it's a shlamim. but it's gufo karav shlamim. So the motar Pesach, leftover Pesach, it itself, that very animal that was once designated as a Pesach, is karav, goes up on the mizbeach as a shlamim. Im hikdish asham, but if he's makdish a female for his carbon asham, ba'ola, it would have to become an ola, and gufu karav ola. But a female can never become an ola. A female animal, not a female bird. A female animal can never become an ola. So if he's makdish a female for his asham, that's not the same as being makdish a female for his Pesach, because it itself cannot never become an ola. Mahu kedon hahi. So what is it like? It's like kedon hahin. It's like these amar. These are saying, these rabbis are saying, hektish damim. Hektish damim hiktish. So what did he do when he consecrated the animal? He was making hektish damim. He wasn't making it to the mizbeach because he's being maktish a female. He's mafresh a female for his asham. So he can't be making it for the mizbeach because that's not appropriate. It has to be a male. If a hahain, and these rabbis are saying amar hektish gufo hiktish. He's trying to be maktish the goof, and they're saying so it gets kedushas a goof. It can't be the carbon because a female animal cannot become an asham. But it does get Kedushas Aguf, and that's why it could make a Tamura. Because it has to have real Kedushas Aguf in order to make a Tamura. Like we said before, whatever Kedusha you put into it, don't regret it. Hayahu Tzmartu Kodesh, still Kodesh. Good. At the two dots, Rabbi Zeira, I think this Rabbi Zeira is the same as Rabbi Zeira. It might be the same as Rabbi Zeira, went back. It might be a different generation. I think Rabbi Zeira is a bit later. Student of Rabbi Elazar. Actually, when Rabbi Zeira fasted 100 fasts, he also fasted 100 fasts that his Rabbi Elazar, should not pass away, because then he would have to lead the yeshiva and he couldn't move to Eretz Yisrael. So that's another interesting facet. He realized his place that there was another Rebbe taking on communal responsibilities. He didn't want that job. He wanted the freedom to go and learn and go to Eretz Yisrael. So it's a musar for us. Sometimes we have responsibilities in Golis, and maybe we should daven that Hashem should lighten our load in Golis so we can be in Eretz Yisrael more often. So he says, Rabbi Zera, B'Shem Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. He says, time of the Rabbi Yeshua. He says, what's the reasoning of Rabbi Yeshua? Daber el Aharon ve'el banav ve'el kol b'nei Yisrael. Speak to Aharon and his sons and all of the Jewish people. V'amarta alehem, and say to them, each and every man, Beis Yisrael, from the house of Yisrael, Sher Yakriv l'Shem la'ola, who designates a carbon to Hashem as an ola. So he's explaining what's the reasoning. Hakol karev la'ola. Anything can become an ola. But then the next pasuk says, L'rtzonechem, to be a ratzon for you, to be appeasing for you, tamim zachar, has to be unblemished and zachar, and a male. Minayin afilu keva, so how do we know even a female could be makdish as an ola? A female can't become an ola. A female can't go on the mizbeach as an ola, as we just explained, but it can be makdish a female as an ola, and then what are they going to do? They're going to sell it and buy a male for an ola. Talmud Lamar babakar. The pasuk. We'll read the pasuk. It's a big one. The Be'er Laharon v'banav kol b'nei Yisrael amarta lehem ish mi beit Yisrael u'minager b'Yisrael asher yakriv carbon ola chol nidrehem kol nidvotechem. They're going to bring a carbon for any neder, any nedava asher yakriv l'Hashem la'ola, that they're going to bring as an ola. The tzonechem, the next pasuk, the tzonechem, for your appeasement, tamim zachar babakar baksavim uva'izim. So it has to be unblemished male in the flock, or in your sheep, or in your goats. So babakar, in the flock, lerabot and nekevo, because there's also females in the flock, not just males. So you see from here that if he's makdish a female for kedushas damim lamizbeach, that works, and they're going to sell the temple will sell the female and bring a male on the mizbeach for his olah. Rabbi Yitzchak be Rabbi Elazar Sha'al. So he asked, Kesiv Zachar, it's written there, Zachar v'atamad babakar, and you're going to tell me babakar comes l'rabot and l'kevo, that comes to include female animals in kedushas damim lemizbeach. Dekavase, so too, Kesiv tamim, it says tamim next to Zachar, it says unblemished, v'atamad babakar. Why don't we say that babakar includes l'rabot balei mumin, because there's usually a bal mum in the flock. You have a flock of 1,000 animals, some of them will have a mum. My benehan, what's the difference between them, between a female and a bal mum? Rav Amar, shavta de chadkdo benehan. There's a big weaver stick in between them. So the Maharshim say this big weaver stick is used to separate the warp threads, so you can push in the waft threads. Now remember this from our Shabbos study, that, and there's a whole sefer called Maaseh Orig, that's the malacha of Ariga, has a lot of component malachot. So they're separating the heddles and the waft and the warp threads. There's all sorts of complex things. But here, this stick, this shavta de kadkada, is this weaver stick to separate these warp threads so you can push in the waft threads. These threads are close together, and then you put in this big stick, and they're far apart. So he says there's an obvious difference between a female, which is naturally in the flock, and a balmum, which is not. No one's going to bring a balmum as a carbon, but a female could be a carbon in other places. So too, a female could get kedushas damim lemizbeach, that the value of the female animal could be kadosh for the mizbeach, and then the temple will go ahead and sell the female animal and bring an olah there. So he says a big difference. That's the way of saying big difference, the weaver stick. So we're not so familiar with weaver sticks, but apparently it's big enough to tell the difference. Rabbi Elazar, Omer Yemachru, this was the seif of our Mishnah. Rabbi Elazar said if he brought wine or oil or birds, then he would sell those items to people who need them on the Mizbeach, and the money would go to an olah on the Mizbeach. It wouldn't go to Bedek Habayis, it would go to an olah. Rabbi Abahu, Hashem Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, says, Taimad Rabbi Elazar. Again, what's the reasoning? We don't have a kasha on him, we're going to explain his reasoning. What's the reasoning of Rabbi Elazar? He says, Deber laharon v'abanav. It's like the pasuk we just brought. You speak to Aaron and his children and all of Am Yisrael, and we say Asher Yakrivu L'Shem La'olah. That when you donate, a stam donation should be for Hashem as an olah. How called karev olah. So anything you're donating to the mizbeach, anything with mizbeach sanctity, which should include wine, oil, and birds, you want to end up bringing that as an olah. L'Tzonachem Tamim Zachar. And when it goes on, the next pasuk says, for your ratzui, for your appeasement, a unblemished male, yachol afilu ofos, you would have thought even birds should go up. Tamadumar babakar, but that pasuk includes babakar. That's items in the flock. So what he's saying is, if you're donating animals to the Beis Hamikdash, they should go up as olas. But if you're designating birds, it says babakar. So birds, we're going to sell them to bring an animal olah. Below ofos, so it's birds, not ofos. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Boon, Bar Chia, Chavun Yativin, they're sitting, v'amrin, and they said, Taman, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, time of Rabbi Shimon. So over there, we just had a few lines ago, Rabbi Yochanan explained the reasoning behind Rabbi Shimon. Sheken nekeva shebaof keshera lavo ola. Because a female bird can be a bird ola. Remember, for an animal ola must be a male. Vecha, and here, Amar Hachin, here he says, turning over to Yud Gimel, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Kaimte Keha. So I'll establish it like this. So he's saying really that a bird shouldn't be. So Rabbi Yirmiyah was saying for Rabbi Buddha, a bird shouldn't be an olah. And here he's saying, well, listen, Rabbi Yochanan explained the reasoning that a bird could be an olah. So why don't we bring the birds, the female birds anyway, that he donates as an olah? Amar Yosei Kim Take Yahad Amar Rabbi Shmuel B'Shem Rabbi Zera. So I will explain this from what Rabbi Shmuel said in the name of Rabbi Zera. Kol she'eno yachol likarev, lo hi v'lo demeya. Anything that can't be brought as an offering, not itself and not its value. Lo kadsha ele hekdesh damim. It doesn't become kedusha with kedushas haguf. Remember, kedushas haguf is real internal sanctity in the animal that could make it tzmura. It's only hekdesh damim. Ele hekdesh damim. But amrat yaus, and you tell me yaus. Here's the word yaut. Yaus. It's good. It's nice. Shkoyach, what you're saying. Lahakrivu. You're saying you can go ahead and bring this bird that was just donated as an offering. Ein at yachol. You're not able. Dichsiv babakar. Because what is this verse about donating an olah say? It says babakar, in the flock. Philo ofot, and not birds. So livdoto, and to redeem the bird, ein at yachol, you can't redeem the bird. She'ein la'of pidyon. Birds have no redemption. So that's interesting. A bird you can't buy back from the mizbech. Lefumchen, and so according to this, you have to say, Lo kadsha ele kedushas damim, that a bird donated to the temple. This was the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Elazar was saying a bird or wine or oil donated to the mizbeach, that the bird doesn't go up itself as an olah, even if it's a female bird, because it didn't get kedushas haguf, it only got kedushas damim. And this kedushas damim is not the same as bedek habayis. So it's interesting because the carbon 8 at the top says this is kedushas bedek habayis, but that doesn't make sense with what we were saying at the bottom of our base. This is really kedushas damim lemizbeach, that the value of these birds is consecrated to be on the mizbeach as an olah. So you're going to sell these birds, even though it's a female bird, it could be an olah. You're going to sell them along with his wine and his oil and whatever it is that could go on the mizbeach, because they have kedushas damim lemizbeach. It can't be a carbon itself. You're going to sell it to bring a male animal as an olah on the mizbeach. So we'll wrap it up there. Baruch Hashem, we saw a lot of the individuality of the carbon Yerushalmi versus the Bavli, and it really is a message of Achdus. And we got reminded of the Palgas today, and of Rabbi Shimon HaTzadik, and his meeting with Alexander the Great. So Baruch Hashem, we covered a lot of ground. Shkoyach, Rabbi. Thank you. Thank you everyone on Zoom. Shkoyach. And they brought pitchforks, then Alexander's army would be upset with them.